בוקר טוב לכולם, צהריים טובים, ערב טוב, תלוי איפה אתם נמצאים בעולם. היום אפריל, השישי באפריל, מעניין שכדאי לשמוע על תוכנית של אוסטרלי, שהוא היה בעצם רוקח, שהבין מה התרופות, שאני באה בעצם מהצד הזה, ולכן מאוד נתפסתי לתוכנית שלו, והייתי רוצה לעדכן אתכם במספר דברים, יש לו כמה שידורים, אז אני עכשיו מעלה את זה, דקה.
Matchbox, which is related to Operation Paperclip, where all these Nazi scientists were brought to Australia and infiltrated our hospitals, psych departments, politics, all this type of thing, which we just, again, this is not mainstream knowledge at all.
אתם מבינים פה, הם הכניסו את חבורת הנאצים, אוקיי, הם קראו לזה שם אחר במקום פייפר קליפ, אבל שימו לב שהוא מדבר על הקטע הזה, לאן הכניסו בתי חולים, לפסיכיאטריה והפוליטיקאים. יש פה חלקים מעניינים אחרים שתכף
But you
נמשיך.
can look this up. Now, a lot of these experiments that were going on were, there were precursor programs even before this happened after World War II. William Mackenzie was one of the most famous, scientists in Australian history, but he was obsessed with children, disease, genetics, and not only that, the local fauna, particularly Aboriginal people and blood types and that type of thing. So this is another fascinating rabbit hole. Some of you will have been down, the rhesus factor, the blood types A, B, and O. And if, the oldest continuous culture is Aboriginal people, the genetics and bloodlines and all this type of thing that the elites and scientists are just obsessed with even to this day. This is fascinating to have a read about, which I'll get to some good articles on this topic in just a second. But when a lot of people came over here, they couldn't even believe some of the animals that are here. And Australia's got very unique animal species, right? It's almost like these marsupials are like a hybrid of a mammal and a reptile, that the mammals that can lay eggs. And this is very unique to Australia. And people just didn't even believe that these creatures are real because they look like hybrids or whatever back in the day. And not only that, we've got a lot of megafauna that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So again, how old is Australia? Why is it here and nowhere else? All these types of questions. So Archaics did a really interesting video on all this, and he's done plenty of videos covering Australia, and I'll link to these videos I mentioned down below. But this is a fantastic 6-part article series by the Australian Peacekeepers talking all about this MK Ultra and all these experiments that they're doing in Australia. And Fiona Barnett mentioned this in her testimony about Dr. Anthony Kidman, who's Nicole Kidman's father, working for the CIA, mind control research, a lot of the abuse that went on, that type of thing. And some of these quotes are just, unbelievable about what they were doing to native Aboriginal people here and that type of thing. Not only that, they were really obsessed with chemical and biological weapons. So some of you might have read about, like Lyme disease being created at Plum Island and all those experiments that were happening in the US, but this was all happening in Australia as well. And a lot of medical research continues to happen to this day in Australia, which is pretty controversial as well, which we might get to in future episode. But this 6-part series is brilliant. I'll link to it down below. They touch on the connections, Huxley and ASIO, even some of the connections to the CIA, the Dalai Lama and all this type of thing that happened in Australia. So again, we seem to be a bit of a testbed for some of this stuff. But as I mentioned in that first part, Fiona Barnett, the documentary where she talks about the abuse that she underwent at the hands of those different people, I've touched on that before. A lot of this is kind of a result of these earlier programs of these scientists and people, these crazy doctors that came in and just did these experiments that you wouldn't get away with these days. Maybe they're still happening in underground labs or whatnot, but this type of stuff was kind of starting to get a bit mainstream throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then it obviously all got covered up, and I've touched on how this all connects to secret societies, politicians, people of influence in plenty of these videos that you guys can check out as well on the channel. One thing you might not have heard about before, though, is this connection here to foreign intelligence agencies and just how long they've kind of been running these blackmail influence rings over Australia. And look, a lot of this really came to a head in when Gough Whitlam got overthrown, and he wasn't happy with the influence that the CIA and other foreign intelligence agencies were having over Australia and wanted transparency around Pine Gap, the military base, which we're going to get to in just a second. But around that time as well, this was kind of when the UN, these NGOs that continue to basically control the world to this day, and our politicians are kind of puppet masters for whatever these big organizations want to push through. But this is around the time of the Lima Agreement and gutting manufacturing in Australia, and we've seen how much that's been gutted, and the result of that now is really just starting to play out and hurt us. But yeah, Gough Whitlam was not happy that the CIA and these intelligence agencies were doing all this secret stuff and wouldn't share it. There was no transparency. And so, again, Australia's the modern Australia and the version that we're told of history, settled by the British, right, still under the rule of the monarch and all that type of thing. But we've also obviously infiltrated by these intelligence agencies, and this is a really important base. There's been some videos and other information about.
אני רוצה שתבינו שכמו שבישראל עשו את ההסכמים עם המוסד, השב"כ, לא משנה מה, כל רשת ביטחון הם הקימו, הם בעצם לקחו MI6 יחד עם CIA, בנו תשתית עבורם, לא עבור הבית ליהודים. והם מימנו את אותם בחורים צעירים, בחורות צעירים שהתגייסו כאילו, לשמש אותם בשירותם ובתוכנית שלהם. וכל מי ששירת יודע שהוא לא יכול לדבר. זה כמו כת, כל הניסויים שלהם, כל מה שהם עשו. ותראו גם באוסטרליה מי בעצם הכניס אותם לתוך אותה מקום הכי מסוכן שיש באוסטרליה. ולא רק זה, הוא מסוכן הם שולטים דרך כאן, הם יכולים לראות כל דבר שקורה בישראל, ואני אמרתי את זה כמה פעמים. אני אמשיך שתקשיבו לו.
How deep underground this all goes, and you think about the strategic position of Australia, this being right in the outback, and even Australia, how it kind of remains a bit of a neutral country. I want to get to all this in a second, how I think we're going to play a big role in this, heading towards this technocracy with AI, surveillance, tech, and all that type of thing being what is going to control the world. But it's also interesting that this is located not too far from Uluru, right, in the middle of the outback. And the official story around Uluru, there's a lot of questions and theories about what this even may be, this huge rock just in the middle of nowhere. That's not the only sort of mystery in Australia, though. We've got these deep underground caverns, and they're said, they're formed millions of years ago, but there's plenty of stories of tunnels underground all through Queensland. I think even the acknowledged underground tunnel networks in Melbourne and Victoria are some of the most extensive in the world. So, how long have they been here? Was it just natural erosion over millions of years, like we've been told? Pretty crazy stuff happening and all these mysteries in the outback of Australia. And My Lunch Break is a great channel, has done a good breakdown on Pine Gap, and obviously some Tartaria Australia flavored stuff as well, which we'll get to in just a second. But let's change gears a bit and let's get into the kind of satanic, occult, dark history of Canberra, radio channel 666, just a coincidence, right? Now, this was obviously designed. Melbourne in Victoria used to be the capital before Canberra came over, and it was like they had a fresh start to build this building and this territory and whatever, with these different occult symbologies and astrological alignments and all this weird, wonderful stuff, designed by Marion and Walter Burley Griffin, that were both deep into the occult and theosophy, that type of thing. So if you have a look at Canberra, it's got a lot of similar alignments and structures to Washington, D.C., the Vatican, the pyramids, and all these kind of other power structures aligned here with the Old War Memorial, Mount Ainslie, and a few other things which I'll get into. So there are some good videos that are pretty hard to find these days about all this stuff. You know, we've got the cube there, the black cube of Saturn, 666. I won't go into all these breakdowns, but I'll walk you through some of the more interesting ones now. We know that there's deep connections to Freemasonry, the occult, Kabbalah, secret societies, all this type of thing. But let's have a look at some of these bird's eye views of Canberra. So we've got the Freemason compass there. We've got the pyramid here with the all-seeing eye. We've got the X marks the spot, all this weird, wonderful stuff because they were able to design this landscape basically from scratch and do it how they want, align it to all this weird and wonderful stuff that they believe in. So the original Commonwealth Star in Australia had its six sides on the star, which is interesting itself if you've been down that rabbit hole before. But let's have a look at these Canberra buildings, and we've got the pyramid structure there, the huge flagpole, you know, pyramids, phalluses, these type of thing that we see again, as I mentioned before, Washington DC, the Vatican, the domes, all this type of thing, and all these kind of Kamala, gematria, Kabbalistic numbers and coincidences. There's Canberra there with the hexagon, the six sides that I mentioned before. Just like the Vatican here, it looks like the head of a snake with the tongue pointing to the black pyramid, and then the bigger metal pyramid above that as well. Just all this dark occult stuff that you don't notice unless you know this stuff and you've got the eyes to see it. We've also got some ties here to Aleister Crowley, you know, occult magic with the upside down T, the circle, all this type of thing on the head of the snake there as well. So very, very weird. Not only that, on the flagpole here, we've got two lots of three of these Maltese crosses, which has got ties to the Rothschilds, the Knights of Malta, the Jesuits, all this weird, wonderful stuff. So why has this kind of been incorporated into the Australia capital? You really have to ask yourself. We've also got the owl, which is on a 33-degree lean in Canberra. If you know about the owl being a symbol for Moloch and all this weird stuff they do at Bohemian Grove, all the elites in these meetups. So yeah, Australia's got it at all, if not more, than some of these other places. Inside, we've got these black and white checkerboard floors, the poles and that sort of thing. But interestingly, right in the middle again, we've got that black cube, which we're going to get to in more detail in just a second. I want to also mention here the Canberra War Memorial, which Canberra kind of looks down through at, which is the dome. Again, just like the Vatican, just like Washington, D.C., you've got the main building and the domes and the phalluses, the uprights and that type of thing. The two towers in Freemasonry, ties to Solomon's temple. So just all this occult architecture that they were all able to build from Shrine of Remembrance. Because again, this was meant to be a war memorial, and it's got all this kind of Greek, Roman, Egyptian style architecture, a pyramid on top. Just doesn't really have anything to do with war or remembering the soldiers or anything. Weird kind of statues of gods or whatever they are. Just it doesn't make sense. And once again, it's because it's all full of pagan occult symbolism. These people are obsessed with sex magic and all these weird rituals. And as you can see here, it almost looks like forced sperm going to the egg. We've got the checkerboard floors. This looks straight through to an interesting building, which I'll talk to in just a second. And if we go on the inside here, we can see again, the light shines down onto this black cube at on the 11th of the 11th at 11 a.m. So there's your 33 for these, Freemason occult secret societies, pillars, just very, very weird. Nothing to do with war, really. If you have a look inside, you can still go and do tours and that here. And so it kind of makes you wonder, with things like Port Arthur and Australia being a testbed for the New World Order. I just want to play a little part from this clip here that I mentioned the other day about some of the stuff that we're maybe not told and these occult ties to Port Arthur, if Australia is indeed a testbed for the New World Order and this type of thing, as the video is going to freeze if it's going to let me play it here. One that I think are really important to understand is the occult side of things. And this ties in to something that Annika said in this interview, which was our most popular episode of the year, where she spoke about how April 30 is really important in the satanic occult pagan calendar. And that's because it was the date that Anton LaVey founded the Church of Satan in 1966. And she spoke about how that week leading up to it is where they do a lot of sacrifices and that type of thing. So obviously, this also has ties to Freemasonry and all these kind of occult ritual style things that you can break down. And this is how these cults and secret societies work with what was reported in local newspapers and all around Australia with the 33 Freemasonry side of it. But I want to get back to that date that Annika mentioned, because Port Arthur started on the 28th, and then the siege overnight led into the 29th of April. So 29-4 is another 33, and then Martin Brighton was sentenced on the 22nd of the 11th, which is another 33, as well as all those headlines. So those of you that are familiar with secret societies and Freemasonry and 33 and all this type of thing, I think that's something that Paul might get into. So as I've kind of mentioned before, a lot of people now have woken up to this, and you can join that Facebook group if you want more info. Watch that interview I did with Paul, or all his episodes on the WASP files. And obviously the strongest testimony, the official stories, what we're told, was survivor Wendy Skur, who knew Martin and was there on that day and saw it kind of all unfold. But if Australia is a testbed for the New World Order and, run by the UN, and one of the documents that got passed to Australia around that time was that they wanted to ban guns and start that crackdown, because what happens in Australia tends to follow in the other Five Eyes countries, right? The UK, Canada, and the US. So Australia was that country where they first wanted to ban guns and then begin the push to de-arm citizens for kind of everything that's happening now. And obviously more recently we've seen Bondi and, they've
מה שרציתי להגיד, שפה הם סובבו את העניינים שהאום שולט באוסטרליה, והאום זה בעצם, נחזור אחורה בכמה וידאוים שהראיתי, זה התחיל מ-League of Nations, אחרי מלחמת העולם השנייה הם חידשו את הקטע הזה של האום, אני חושבת שזה היה ב-46-7. הם התחילו את זה בסתר כמובן, והם בנו את התשתית של so called האום, לעזור למדינות העולם. זה השקר הכי גדול. בכל מקום הם נכנסו חופשיים, עשו להם את הדברים כמו בארץ, הכל אי אפשר להכניס את האזרחים מאותה מדינה, הם אלה שמנהלים את המדינה מבפנים, ואותם צריך להוציא, כי ההסכמים שנעשו, צריך להבין, הם בתחום שיפוט ימי. אם אנחנו חוזרים לאדמה, אין להם שום סמכות, אין לנו שום חוזים איתם. ואנחנו צריכים להעביר גם את החיילים שלנו, להתחיל לפוצץ כל עמדה שהם יושבים בה. כל מקום שהם נמצאים בדגל אמריקאי, הם לא אמריקאים. הם מייצגים צבא, הם שיבוטים, הם רוצחים אנסים מבתי סוהר שעברו MK אולטרה, הם לא אמריקאים, הם נמצאים בבסיסים בתוך ישראל שלהם, שלא ניתן לישראלים להיכנס. הם הרוצחים שלנו כרגע בתוך המדינה. חובה כל אחד, כל אמריקאי, להוציא אותו, לבקש ממחלקת ההגירה, להוציא כל אמריקאי מהארץ. מצטערת. זה מה שנשאר. כל חייל אמריקאי, out. אם אתם רוצים לשמור על המדינה, אבל כל עוד אנשים לא מבינים את הצורך להתנתק מכל מה שקשור למערכת שקבלו אותנו, זו מערכת שיצרו במכוון על ידי גנבת זהות וסחר בבני אדם, חד וחלק. לכן הילדים הם לא שלנו. החיילים משרתים כשכירי חרב, וזה בכל מקום, בכל מקום, ואין לנו מה להמשיך. אין לנו יום אחד לשבת בשקט ולהמשיך. הכנסת לא שלנו, הם לקחו שליטה מבפנים, וככה הם מבצעים בכל מקום. אז א', הכנסת לא שלנו. המערכת המשפטית שאתם רואים פתאום שהיא כן מרשה, לא מרשה, לא שואלת בכלל את הכנסת, זה בגלל שזה גוף פרטי שנקרא, שהוא בעצם כל הבר נשלט על מה שנקרא, שייך בעצם גם כן לחלק של האום, שנקרא יונידרויט. כשזה מתחיל ב-UN, יונידרויט, זה מופיע גם כן כחלק של האום. כל השלוחות האלה, אונר"א, הכל, זה עבודה בעיניים, זה הכל שייך לאותה כת נאצית. כולם, בלי יוצא מהכלל. ולכן צריך להפסיק במיידי. עכשיו, כל מי שהולך לעבודה בגופים האלה של רפאל, של כל, הם הבעלים, מה שנקרא בלק רוק, הם כולם הנאצים שולטים. אז אין לנו מה ללכת לעבודה כדי לשלם מיסים. ביום שלא ייתכן שמצד אחד מצב חירום, אל תצאו מהבתים, אבל תמשיכו לשלם מיסים. לא קיים כזה דבר. אם יש מצב חירום, זה לכל דבר. אבל הם עובדים על האנשים, זה מישהו אחר מנהל. אין לנו, לא ביבי, ביבי כבר מת מזמן. אין לנו, אני לא יודעת אפילו אם יש איזשהו מישהו אמיתי בתוך אלא הם אדיוטים שממשיכים כאילו. אבל הכל שיבוטים, הכל מערכת מדיה. אין לנו, אף אחד צריך ללכת להפיל שם טיל. תכינו אתם טילים, הרי הייתם בצבא, למדתם איך להכין טיל, מה הבעיה הטיל לזרוק על לפוצץ את הכנסת? לא אני אמרתי.
Tighten gun control, but what else have they done? Australia's now looking, as a result of it, we're looking down the barrel of the tightest free speech laws and cracking down on protests and all this other stuff that has nothing to do with what actually happened. So make of that what you will. So inside the shrine there, we've got more weird occult stuff, you know, red checkerboard on the roof, that type of thing. And as I mentioned before, the building that you look straight down to from the shrine is aligned here with William Barak, who was kind of the Aboriginal guy who was trying to stop them settle and take over this land and whatever back in the day. And then they eventually did. And this is meant to be a memorial, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that a bit of a slap in the face as they kind of overtook this area or whatever? But yeah, make of that what you will. Now, Dale, who's a fantastic researcher, did a 9-part series all about the occult shrine and breaking all this symbolism and weirdness down. But another interesting thing he mentioned in this was their obsession with Aboriginal DNA back in the day, as well as this Melbourne synchrotron for all this weird scientific research. So this is actually officially a part of CERN. So that Hadron Collider, you might have seen those weird occult ceremonies they did there at the opening of that. You've got all your 666s in here, and most people aren't even aware of this, that we have a particle accelerator in Melbourne, and it's pretty hard to find information about. But yeah, there it is. You can look at it just there. So again, what do you guys think they're doing at these facilities? And is it far more weird and wonderful than what we're actually being told? But changing gears, let's get into some of the more ancient Australian history and if what we're being told is the official narrative. So Campbell and I did that deep dive. He's done heaps of videos about that Tartaria, Australia angle and where some of these buildings here, again, kind of that Greek, Roman, Egyptian style looking building, the columns and stuff. And it was just, you know, there wasn't any infrastructure here, dirt roads, horses and carts. And somehow there's these insane buildings with just incredible architecture absolutely everywhere scattered across Australia. And what do you guys think? Was this here already? Did they actually build this? Were they able to make all this glass and these bricks when we didn't really have manufacturing base set up? I think the jury's still out on that one. But what I do think is really interesting is some of the ancient Australian evidence. So we've got these hieroglyphs that you can still go and look at today. Interesting, there's some fires that went through here recently. But this is these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs that are found in Gosford. We've got this Sphinx in Sydney, which people have got mixed opinions about, right? And even all the way through to the Gympie Pyramid and these other, I mentioned some of the landmarks that are, I've heard different stories about that are off limits to the public up in Kakadu and that type of thing. So one researcher I'll get to in just a second that did a lot of work on this was Rex Gilroy. So we've got all this obviously ancient Aboriginal artwork and what were they trying to depict and what does this all mean? Some of these saying, 50,000 years old or whatnot. Some of these structures that they were built, was it just water erosion? All these usual questions that you've got.
אוקיי, נעבור לפה. יש פה כמה חלקים מעניינים שאני רוצה לצרף בנושא הזה. כשהוא מראיין אישה מאוד מפורסמת שעברה מגיל צעיר התעללות בכל הכת הזאת, ואחר כך היא שירתה, איך שנקרא טראפיקינג, כאשר היא שירתה, עברה כל מיני MK אולטרות למיניהם, והיא שירתה בביון, והיא הצליחה איכשהו לצאת מהסיפור, אחד מהשורדות מה שנגיד, אבל היא הייתה חלק מהרבה ספרים ודברים מעניינים בצורה בלתי רגילה, מבוקשת מאוד.
Because people now, this extreme examples of abuse and programming, but it's also the low-level stuff that's affecting the general public. I think that most people don't realize that they're under.
Oh, right. It's just simple brainwashing. If you've been watching the ABC, and I'll tell you why, the ABC's it's just a propaganda mouthpiece for the government and the people behind the government. So the Rothschilds are the ones who run the Western world through these secret societies. Every little Australian town has a Freemason lodge or a Catholic church. So it's either the Jesuit order or the Freemasons, and the women's groups and whatever, the kids' rainbow clubs, that, got a hold on the towns. So basically, propaganda works like this. It used to be through Aldous Huxley's writings and the Inklings and all those pedos, who wrote the Narnia series. He wasn't a Christian, he was a vile pedophile. And, Peter Pan, who wrote all those, Disney-based books, all the fairy tales that were actually programming stuff, programming scripts. And the Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, all that lot, they used to use writing as the propaganda method and to influence social change. Then, of course, movies came in, and then you got pedo Walt Disney, and Walt Disney World became the programming site for victims to be taken to and all that sort of thing. And you use, then they brought in, music, and you brought in, film and TV. Now, there's a few things there. It's brain entrainment. Whatever, the brain normally fires around, like an alert waking state might be beta. But then there's the more you slow the mind down again, the more the brain becomes more susceptible to suggestion. And it, like I said, that left versus right brain, it suppresses critical thinking of the left brain and brings the right hemisphere into dominance. And it does not criticize anything that is information. It believes anything, right? The right hemisphere, if you totally suppress the left. So what TV does and what music can do through entrainment with the beat, so if you're presented any sort of rhythmic pattern through sound, sight, even tapping, whatever, the whole body the brain will entrain to that, so it will copy that beat. And if you hit music at a theta beat, then that's a hypnotic state. So alpha is what TV runs at, the flickers in the screen or whatever. Alpha primes the brain for suggestion, and then theta as the brain slows down, theta is hypnosis, is a trance state, and then delta is even slower. So if you've got those drumming, so the things that bring the right hemisphere into dominance and makes you suggestible will be Hillsong revival meetings in their rock music.
Yeah.
It'll be hypnosis, Tony Robbins and his neuro-linguistic programming. It'll be the music coming out before, any of that. And it will be like hypnosis will place you in an altered state of consciousness, right? Which is just the right hemisphere being made dominant. And whatever happens, it will go into your subconscious. And then it becomes a unconscious conditioned response. Okay? So whatever happens after that, you'll see a Mars bar or a Coke, you'll just see the writing or whatever, and you'll go, oh, I want one, because your subconscious has been told that. And it doesn't matter your freaking willpower. This is why Ozempic's so popular, and don't take that, people. There's 1,300 people have gone blind in Australia from Ozempic permanently, totally. But anyway, this is how brainwashing works.
No, what you've just describing, you've outlined it really well, because I think COVID's a great example with this mass psychosis, right?
Oh.
And a lot of people look back on that now, and they do actually feel they're like, I was like under a spell or hypnosis, like you've described, because of the repetition, the TV, the fear state, all those things that you've just outlined.
And everyone intellects think, oh, well, ABC, it's a classy source of news or whatever. No, it was the worst. Right? The ABC, like I said, they're pedophiles. I was used at the Sydney TV studios, which they're selling and demolishing or something, to produce child snuff porn when I was 6 on the set of Play School.
Yeah.
Right? They're just like years ago, and I've said in my book, about 7, they did during the Church Committee investigations in MKUltra. Anyway, they found out, I can't remember what don't have the amazing memory anymore, but they found about 700 journalists in mainstream media in America were CIA agents. And how many do you think are over here? All the ones at ABC who hammered me, and anyone else at the Australian who hammered me and wrote hit pieces on me, are all working for MI6. And people have to understand too, child trafficking is run as a single global operation coordinated by military intelligence, mainly the CIA. And so in Australia, I always said it was ASIO, Kim Beazley Sr. He was always ASIO. He was the coordinator of the child trafficking when I was young. But the thing is, the people who oversaw it all and were in charge of it all was MI6.
Yes.
British military intelligence. Everyone goes, oh, CIA, this, MKUltra, this, and that. No, Margaret Mead worked for the OSS. Gregory Bateson worked for the OSS. They all came from British military intelligence, which then became the CIA. CIA, ASIO were all founded, and ASIC were all founded by British military intelligence. They are the head of the snake, and then, of course, the Rothschilds run everything in England.
הבנתם? אתם יודעים מי זה הרוטשילד? הרוסטשילד שנתן לנו קרקע לבנות לנו את המקום? אתם קולטים את המזימה הנוראית הזאת? אחרי ששחטו אותנו בשואה נוראית, מה שביצעו בנו, את הניסויים וכל מה שרק אפשר, מה שביצעו. הנחש, השטן, בא ומגיש לנו, הנה, קחו, עכשיו ניתן לכם, אנחנו ניקח את כל הפיצויים, אנחנו נדאג להקים לכם את המדינה, ואנחנו נמצוץ את כל אירופה, את כל גרמניה, על מה שביצעו באנשים, שזה צריך לקחת. קמו, הביאו ולקחו חזרה בהפרטות של 15 שנה לקחו את הכל. מכרו כל מה שאפשר בציבורי. והכניסו נותני שירותים, שכנראה הראשים שלהם גם כן, ועוד שנייה תשמעו גם על בוש, בוש הביא את אדון אידלשטיין, השטן בהתגלמותו. מי זה היה? מי היה בכלל משפחת בוש? רק תשמעו את זה, אתם תופסים את הראש, אתם פשוט לא מבינים איך הוקמה המדינה הזאת. מי הקים אותה? ואסור כולם ברגע זה להפסיק לשרת. אסור ללכת לצבא, אסור לרשום את הילדים ברשות האוכלוסין וההגירה. זה שקר, זו מרמה, זה משרד נותני שירותים של איזה קרימינלים, חוטפי ילדים. יותר שאני שוחה בזה, אני אומרת, אלוהים ישמור, אלוהים, אני לא יודעת איך אפשר להציל את תפסיקו ללכת כמו הסוסים, שאוטמים להם את העיניים.
Yeah, and that gets deep into bloodlines and stuff. So I want to get your thoughts
Yes, well,
on that, because
yeah.
I know David I talks about, you know, demonic or non-human at the top and these ancient bloodlines. Yeah, and anarchy. Do you agree with that? And what do you think? Yeah.
To some degree, yes, it's okay. So you had like Phil Schneider came out about Dulce, and
yes,
there was this war using laser weapons, and you know he had all these fingers chopped off scars, and he brought. Dulce was the head MK lab in America. All right, they put all these MK facilities usually in bases. The big stuff like Pine Gap is an MK Ultra facility. That's why no one's allowed there, you know.
אתם מבינים גם הבסיסים בארץ שמסתירים מהישראלים ואומרים להם הם לא יכולים להיכנס, משתמשים בהם כאולטרה על התושבים. אני לא אתפלא אם כל אלה שלא מתעוררים או נמצאו ערירים כבר הרבה זמן שלא התעוררו. צריך לבדוק אותם, צריך להיכנס לבסיסים ולבקש חיפוש, ללכת למשטרה. אם אתם מכירים אנשים ממשפחות שעובדים, זה לא רק משטרה, זה גם הצבא שלנו. אנחנו מבקשים להיכנס, לעשות חיפוש. יש את האמנות של שיתוף פעולה. לא ייתכן שבישראל יש אמנה, אם אני לא טועה 24, או שאני אחפש, אני אביא אותה. שיתוף פעולה, זאת אומרת, ישראלים צריכים להיכנס ולבדוק מה קורה שם. אי אפשר שזה יהיה חד צדדי. בפרט שהם לא אמריקאים.
I like 7-story CIA facility underneath Holsworthy Army Base. It had a tunnel that linked it to Anstone nuclear reactor at Lucas Heights. The same group that built Anstone built Pine Gap and some of the other, and I think maybe the CSIRO headquarters was another abuse site in Canberra. Oh, they demolished that. But they just demolished everything. They demolished Anthony Kidman's Freemason Lodge, where I was there with Nicole Kidman and her mother, and they did this ritual where they murdered a baby and danced around in white robes because it was the order of the star. So they burnt that down. But anyway, but military bases were the safest. And they, yeah, look, they're at the forefront of it all. And people go, oh, MK Ultra. Well, I hope they're ready for MK Delta, which is the Western Child Soldier Program. All those experiments with MK Ultra had a reason. So they could, through the MK Ultra techniques, create these, you know, child sex slaves like Virginia Giuffre, who did not kill herself, please. She was assassinated by the military. Anyway, and then you've got, you know, next level, depending on your bloodline, your physical capacity, your looks, how attractive you were, your body, your agility, your muscle memory, all that sort of thing, your speed, your athletic ability, your IQ. The biggest thing was IQ, starting point. Depending on all of those things, and they tested you thoroughly, then they would assign you to whatever tasks they wanted you for. So for me, I had the full gamut, right? Because because I was part of Project Alice and the Jason Super Soldier program, then I had the lot. I had the works, like the whole smorgasbord of possibilities. So I'm speaking from that perspective. And also, I was trained by military intelligence from a very young age, and I was supposed to still be in the system, and I left. And I was Grand Dane. I had the second position to the Grandmother of Darkness in Australia. So I was the second highest ranking female in the secret societies. All right.
So once you've described all this stuff about how there's just an obsession with how the mind works ultimately to control people and bring in the New World Order and that type of thing, the other aspect we haven't touched on yet is the dumbing down of society, like physically. So do you have any thoughts on like the fluoride and the aluminium mercury vaccines?
Why would you put an aluminium byproduct in toothpaste or the water?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a no-brainer. These are basic. I mean, look, I was raised by a naturopath, so I never went to doctors as kids or whatever, unless it was some emergency medicine situation. So I am wholeheartedly into herbal alternatives and getting away from any sort of chemicals. And so, there are a lot of things you can take to calm the nervous system. There's a whole bunch of herbs out there. And I'll tell you what, they work better for Valium. When I was having flashbacks to being electrocuted, and I'd wake up all night with just electricity being pumped through my heart and all this sort of thing, and reliving being electrocuted, and I couldn't sleep at all, Valium didn't even touch it. But taking a combination of herbs and, through live herb extracts,
yes,
calmed it in half an hour,
Yeah. No, I'm a big believer. I'm a big believer in all that too.
I'm not into, I think, look, from this, I told everyone, don't take it, the vax. Anyone who I knew took it, sick, dying, dead, or mentally ill. It's a lot of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
People suddenly went psychotic.
Yes.
Because mental illnesses, along with physical illness, always begins with inflammation of the brain. PTSD is inflammation of the brain. It's all inflammation. And this stuff was crossing the blood-brain barrier and causing inflammation in the brain. So people were just going crazy and psychotic and whatever in front of my eyes. So I had a psychologist who went crazy after the vax.
I know people very close to me who seem like different people now, and it is so sad, isn't it? But
שמעתם? תלכו לבתי חולים, לחולי נפש, תבדקו מי האנשים, ותגלו שכל אלה שנמצאים שם שהוזרקו בחיסונים האלה הם אומללים, כי לא ניתן לרפא אותם, הם רק ירצחו, הם ימותו. יש דרך להוציא אותם מזה. נכון שזה טיפול ארוך, אבל בטיפול טבעי. כל מה שנותנים להם שמה, בתוך אותו מקום, נובע כתוצאה מאותם זריקות שניתנו כשקר לאוכלוסייה. אז לכן בתי המשוגעים מפוצצים, ולא רק זה, הנותני שירותים והמערכת והפרוטוקולים היא לחיסול האוכלוסייה הישראלית. והגיע הזמן שנקום ונטפל בכל מה שקורה. למי שיכול להקדיש ולשנות.
Our military bases. So I've had people talk about how Pine Gap could be the biggest one and maybe the most important as the head of the Five Eyes. And
in Australia?
Or even just the biggest one in the world now in terms of the importance of that intelligence gathering. Oh, sorry. I'll mark that.
Yeah, it froze.
It's dropped out a couple of times when you've been talking about some...
Oh, gee, I don't know. Was that key words, perhaps?
Oh, man. I might actually...
I'll tell you something. Yes, it is. So that's the head one in Australia, and they were doing cloning research. See, now I can talk about it because it's not so crazy, because Jeffrey Epstein had Zorro Ranch where he had this big underground facility and was doing genetic engineering and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That was happening decades. And when I was 6, I saw a clone army. under Ponga. That was the head of all this stuff, and they took my DNA and my eggs and everything and used them for those programs. Okay?
When you say clone army, are you talking humans or synthetics or hybrids, or what would you describe them as?
Biological clones.
Okay.
But they've got, God knows what they've got now, 6. I'm 56 now, so 50 years later, God knows it's...
Well, I think that's what they're using when we see like all these different Joe Bidens or celebrities, right? There's a combination.
That's not Nicole Kidman. She was bumped off years ago. I mean, that's like there's another version of it out now. This doesn't even look like the last one who was in, the Apple, shows and whatever. Like the latest on Jimmy Kimmel or whatever, that looks like even younger and better than the last one,
Yeah.
So I think they stepped for wife her many years ago. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so all of that stuff. Yeah, it's all been, the Nazis perfected cloning. I mean, there was a kid in France 15, 20 years ago who I think he was in year 9 and he cloned a frog for a science project at a local high school.
This kind of ties into the genetic experiments and like even Trump, touched on UFO and disclosure that they've been hinting towards. So talk to me about your understanding of like, was there like this non-human like alien contact, or is there any of that? Like, how do you view all that stuff as well?
Yes, absolutely. So there were at Dulce, there were greys and reptilians, and there used to be one Dagon. So that's what Dagon was. And they had an altar to Dagon at the bottom floor of the Order of Dagon, the bottom floor of Holsworthy Army Base, where they used to, the top military brass were all there, and they used to did human child sacrifice there. And to this, and they had this big brass statue of one of those reptilian things, are about 7 foot, at least 7, 8 foot tall or something.
So when
I was a kid, they were big to me when I was little. So yes, I did. There was absolutely, and they were great. And I saw one grey at Dulce. They did it to me to see my reaction.
So when people
that's what I remember.
When people hear all this and like the initial response, if you're not across it all, is like fear and whatever, but they actually, if they're so advanced, they wouldn't they could have already wiped us out. So is it like David Icke, I think, talks about they actually need to feed us and farm us, and once we wake up, this is kind of a key to solving all this, or look, how do you view it?
This is where I differ from David. It's Genesis 6 conspiracy, part 1 and part 2. Buy them, get them. They're amazing. Okay. He explains all of this and what it all is, who the Rothschilds are and all that sort of thing. The Rothschilds have a very high percentage of this Anunnaki bloodline in them. Yeah. So there were pre-Adamic races. There was, and this is what all these secret societies know and adhere to. So you had, look, the Bible's real. Everything it had in the Bible was real. Yes, there were a bunch of fallen, whatever you want to call angels, and there's all different types of different races, and they did the wrong thing, and you had Adam and Eve, and they were just one group of humanoids, and they basically, molested them and took all the women and whatever, and then their offspring were part angelic DNA, and they're called Nephilim.
Yeah.
And then the Rothschilds are from that, okay? So there's a lot of Nephilim in their bloodline. And basically, then you've got people, that's why you've got Epstein, he's saying how great Hitler was and all this sort of thing. Hitler was a Rothschild. Mm-hmm. Joseph Mengele was a Rothschild. Otto Skorzeny was. I think he was in their family photos. And George Bush Sr., all the Bush family were Rothschilds. And I had in my book all the photos that were released by the granddaughters of Otto Skorzeny, her boyfriend. He put them up. He's probably dead now. But when they were free, I downloaded a few. But yeah, Hitler up there celebrating his birthday and all this sort of stuff. And they had a big picture of, very obese Mengele, which fit all my therapy drawings and stuff from years before. So Gary Wayne, plug him, get him on, interview him. He's amazing. He explains all these secret societies that I've mentioned to you that I have, memories of from childhood. and was initiated into and was supposed to be part of still. So I know that I've got a bit of John Gettinger said I had Vanderbilt in my background and Levite. So Levite, one of the Israeli tribes. So, and the Levites, they were looking, so the IDF were looking for super soldier candidates in their program, even 10 years ago or something, and they were looking for Levites because you had this weird thing, something about electromagnetism and whatever, but they were the only ones who could touch the Ark of the Covenant without being electrocuted to death. And yeah, so that's the Levite. So there's something about the Levite, and they were the priestly line. So there's something about that. And my mum was a bit Aboriginal. So, and they looked, that's why they studied a lot of the Aboriginal culture, and they often look for Indigenous people in America and Australia, and they, you know, because they're very in touch with their right hemisphere and that spiritual domain, which was weaponized by the military. So we got gone off track.
No, that was perfect. And we've touched on all that stuff again. You tied it all together well. So where do you think we kind of go from here with like the humanity and what's going on with the stuff that you've mentioned? Like, how do we where do we go from here? And
World War III. The Ezekiel 38 war is happening now.
They're following prophecy, but do you?
It's all Bible prophecy is unfolding before us. So everything, and I used to say all this. I said this in the first edition of the 2019 lockdown. I told everyone what was happening before it happened. I said what was going to happen. And then people, you know, I said years ago, I said when Putin came out and said he had a Satan II rocket that was capable of reaching and nuking New York. And then I would tell, I've got some friends in America, and I'd tell my friend in New York, say, get out into the mountains of West Virginia. I said, they're going to nuke New York. Oh, anyway, and then she goes, every time you said something, like a year apart, next thing there was some announcement by the New York mayor, and they would, you know, what to do in a nuclear fallout. And then they'd do something like put up posters in subways, you know, what to do in a nuclear war and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, told you. So nuclear war, it's happening. So I think that the everyone, all these secret societies, all these groups are vying for control. So you've got Trump and that lot are all vying for dominance, you know, and they want their piece of the pie. Putin wants the Ukraine because he comes from that area, or his bloodline comes from that area. He's one of the big ancient bloodlines over there. And, you know, China wants their piece of the pie. So, you know, you're going to have, they're definitely going to nuke America all over. So they're definitely, the Chinese will land invade on the West Coast, and I think Russia invade the East Coast. And they nearly went to war in 2010. That's what if you were watching the YouTubes in 2010, that's what happened when they shot down a fighter plane near Nova Scotia. The Russians, you know, were there in planes, and China were there on the West Coast, and they fired a missile into a suburb north of San Francisco. And if you watch the original footage of people being interviewed, they go, well, I'm in the military, that was a missile, man. You know, and they said it was a gas explosion. It took out like blocks and blocks of houses, you know, about 50K or something or whatever. Well, this is bad memory, but north of San Francisco. It's all going to happen. It's all unfolding as we speak, you know.
Do you believe in that this is something they've done multiple times, like resets, and this ties into why they've got the bunkers to go into? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, they definitely got the bunkers, multiple. You had that woman who was a member of Congress, and she and some other guy who were some good, you know, clean politicians did some admin work and estimated that after 9/11, that was to hide a whole bunch of money that was missing. And they built from the money that they had, the billions of dollars they gave up in America that year, and they built all up they estimated financially from the missing money 136 on the ground bases for the elite in America. Now, this is just like, you do your homework. You know, I have to, well, all my life I've read up on this stuff and kept, you know what you're looking out for when you're being a part of it at the level I was. I think that, they get, but the Bible also says, I can't remember where it is, but these global elites, you know, they'll go and store themselves, and when they come out at the end, they're just going to be murdered and torn apart, you know, by the public.
Yeah. So what does the average person do, and how do we win, and how do we stop this, and what's your ideal scenario?
Get out of the fucking cities.
Yeah.
Get out. Do anything you can. Get out. Sell up. Get out. Sell it for what you can afford. Get out. Get somewhere on land where they're not fracking, where you've got fresh water, and buy a parcel of land somewhere and get food, plant food, and really call on Jesus Christ. I mean, we're at the end, man. You know, like, I don't know how long we got. I pray every day. You know, you can take me now. I think I've done my bit. I mean, I've been trying to, what I do want to do before I go is, because even when all this settles, the world's still here for 1,000 years, according to biblical prophecy. And, you know, the nations breed up again and this sort of thing. And I think, well, you know, I need to leave a legacy. You know, there'll still be people who've been through programming and need to be deprogrammed and, you know, recover, be given some sort of therapy or treatment for trauma association, all this sort of stuff. So I've been trying to write a book, a good book on, you know, aimed at treating trauma dissociation, using methods that I know work, not the stuff that you taught at unis or what have you. You know, the real stuff, because I back engineered what they did to me.
Yeah.
You know, because I was trained by military intelligence right at the top of this stuff, and I also did formal training at university, and I'm coming from that. And I've integrated as much as someone like me could. You know, I still got, look, don't get me wrong, I've still got severe PTSD. I mean, God, you know, and I'm, you know, and I'm weak and, you know, I'm really unwell, but, and I've lost a lot of functional capacity and that sort of thing, but I don't have that horrible amygdala fear response go off and the confusion and the sickly feeling when you're triggered that victims are just like dropped to the floor, incapacitated by. You know, I don't have I haven't researched a lot of stuff lately, but they're building a lot of these colliders. China have got some. I think they're building half a dozen or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that they're all the Rothschilds and in the West, and, you know, Lee and all them, you know, in the East and whatever, are all in vying for supremacy. And they're going to use, you know, they're thinking, you know, we're opening up and going to let our gods out, our forefather gods. You know, it's not going to go well for them.
What about the spiritual significance of Australia in terms of like history and like Uluru or like oldest living culture? What's important about Australia?
Well, I think all these countries, I mean, karma, you know, America's going to be punished heavily for what they did to their Indigenous populations, and Australia, you know, it's not good what happened here. But you've got to remember too that there are some groups that came down from Papua New Guinea and destroyed the first Aboriginals who were Truganini and the were pushed down to Tasmania. So there's been these, you know, struggling for supremacy and you know, ownership has been going on for centuries. But I think what's going to happen is the significance is, and I hope Gary Wayne comes out with another book. There's another book he was doing, and it was on tracing the lost tribes of Israel, because he's saying that, and this is interesting, so the two tribes that come from, the double tribe that comes from Joseph, well, that's modern day some Australians, Canadians, you know, England, and all these groups. So that's where Australia is significant in one way, is that there are, you know, all those Judeo-Christian groups, you know, there's a lot of us who probably from the lost tribes, you know, so I think that's going to come into play in the future. I don't know how much genetic testing is going to be, and with all this ancestry.com and, you know, or how much they'll enforce genetic testing to be able to divide people up and see who's who and bump off the ones they don't want, you know, based on that. They hate the Luciferian elite, hate God's chosen. They hate Christians, and they hate you know, the tribes of Israel. and most of those are lost. So they're going to target them for a new Holocaust and wipe them out as much as they can. They're not going to be totally successful. I think that, and they're just going to continue to, spew this false narrative out there and create division, and everyone's going to hate, one group or another. It's all lies. It's not the truth, Meanwhile, let's just start a war. And what do we do with all the Epstein files that have been released, retracted? Now they're going to release. Well, are they going to release the ones that were retracted the other day, or is this new stuff? I mean, And I was granted access to that web, and I found some stuff, and I found some of my articles in there and all this sort of thing, a bit weird. But what's, they've obviously gotten rid of all the good stuff. There's nothing much in there that I really went looking for. It's just the same old names we knew about 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
When we were called nuts for talking about Frazzle Drip and Pedogate and Pizzagate and Podesta's emails that we all saw, and they had real stuff. Before AI, was a thing, they had all the footage of, Hunter Biden raping his niece and a Chinese little girl, and I saw all of that. I saw the internet go down in front of me. Twitter went out when those New York police released the Frazzle Drip film. I saw the beginning of it and I went, whoa, I'm not watching this. I've seen enough of this in my life. I was there. That was real. We were there. How come no one cared? It was only really the Christian right in America that gave a toss and, supported me, and I had an impact on. Not many of the left cared, and what now they care? Why? Why? Just because Trump's been named. Big deal, And by the way, I wasn't a QAnon conspiracy nutter. I was Michael Aquino, who headed the Psychological Operations Division of the US Army. He was friends with Jim Watkins in the military, and he, he was personal friends with him. Jim Watkins ran 8chan and 4chan. It was a porn site to begin with. And then Jim Watkins played Q for Michael Aquino. And QAnon was brought in to get rid of the False Memory Foundation, which I successfully targeted and destroyed. Aquino was very worried about me coming out, in the early days. Now, people don't realise how much I'm worth to them gone. There's a big price on my head. And if it weren't for the existence of God, I would be dead, But QAnon was just a bloody, and I knew all the way, but I had a contact in the federal cops, and they said, do not criticise QAnon, do not criticise Alex Jones. That is your it's your vehicle for gathering momentum and, getting your message out there. So I played a PR game. And, then I was labelled QAnon conspiracy nutter and everything. No, a poster child. One of the major journalists, I talked to her over the phone, she said, oh, what, so you're not the QAnon poster child? I went, no, I never was.
So what do you think, because I followed the Q stuff, so what do you think was the actual point of all that? Because it obviously did disclose some truth.
Psychological operation.
Yeah.
Fourfold. I mean, for a start, they had to get rid of the False Memory Foundation. That was the first operation to counter the satanic panic of the 80s that Michael Aquino called it satanic panic, dressed up in a theatrical, Halloween costume, went on Oprah and on the temple set and, respect my religious rights to, freedom and all this sort of thing, and expression and all this, when he had raped all these kids and trafficked all these kids and was involved in every major case of trafficking to the White House, pedophilia politicians, leakage, or Offutt Air Force Base and the Finders and McMartin Preschool and Presidio, preschool cases and everything. He was linked to every one of those. So it was up to him to run these psychological operations, and he took down, when I came out, he took down the False Memory Foundation because I had a few goals. When I came out, I went, I'm going to fucking target that thing that's determined whether or not therapists believe clients in Australia since the 90s.
Yeah.
I'm targeting that. I'm taking down False Memory Foundation, run by pedophiles, including Martin Orn and that were on the board, and Peltra. based on false research.
Yes.
Right, CIA psychology research.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Loftus was absolutely discredited and sued successfully.
Yeah.
I was taking down Hillsong because I knew it was a CIA cutout from the start. That I knew of that when I was from being part of all this when I was young, raised up to be a leader in it all. And I was going to expose the Wood Royal Commission, which no one knew anything about until I brought it out. And that list that you see everywhere was my list. You know, people go, oh, have you seen this? You know, like 7 years after I'd written it and published it. And exposed Derek Boys Home as an MK Ultra facility where they recruit, and Engadine Boys Home, Australia's first boys home, as recruitment location. So they were my big goals. And yeah, I think I was pretty successful. And then I released it all, and then I watched it because I never owned anything, and I put it out for free. I said, just copy whatever you want, so long as you know, don't sell.
טוב, אז לכל מאמיני טראמפ וקיואנון שבזבזו כמה שנים במקום שאנחנו נדע איך ובמי איך נקרא לזה, להאמין או ללכת אחרי או לבצע. כולנו, אלה שטענו שלא הוזרקו, כן הוזרקו, וישבנו בקבוצות, ולא עשינו כלום בזמן שנתנו אמונה לאותם גופים להמשיך עם הטרללת שלהם כאולטרה, שטיפת מוח. הגיע הזמן שתעזבו את הקבוצות האלה, חבל על הזמן, תיפגשו פנים אל פנים ותחליטו מה אתם רוצים. האם אתם רוצים את המקום, ולא להגיד, לא, תוכנית, אג'נדה 30, אג'נדה 30, תכננו לנו. אז מה הם תכננו? זה לא אומר שאתם צריכים לשבת ולהסכים לתוכנית. כאילו, אוקיי, תכננו לכבשים. אז אלה שהתעוררו מהחיסונים שהבינו שעבדו עלינו במגפה, ממשיכים לשבת ולספר כל יום, הוא אמר זה, זרק זה. די, צריך להיפגש פנים מול פנים לאלה שרוצים ואכפת להם מהמקום, ולהתחיל לעשות דברים. אין מה לעשות, אין מה להמשיך ללכת לעבודה כשאתה יודע שמפוצצים כרגע מטרתם להרוס כל אפשרות שנמשיך לעבוד, ושנהיה סגורים בתוך גטאות. לא יהיה אוכל, לא יהיה מים, לא יהיה חשמל, לא כלום בדרך הזאת. זה לאט לאט, ככה עובדים הנאצים. לכן לקח מלחמת העולם השנייה, לקחה לאט לאט. לא נתנו להם להבין שהם עולים ברכבת למקום שהולכים לרצוח אותם. טוב, יום טוב, אצלנו נגמר החופש. איסטר, אסתר, הסתר, בהי, הסתר. אסתר הייתה הסתר, הסתר, מילות הכישוף. נומרולוגיה זה דבר מעניין מאוד, ולמזלי, לא הפסקתי משום מה לקחת קורסים בשנות ה-30 שלי, בכל התחומים האלה. אז שיהיה יום טוב לכולם, וחומר למחשבה.
Monetize